A picture-perfect family. A smiling father. A loving mother. 2 innocent daughters. But behind the walls of their Colorado home, something sinister was brewing. What happened next would shock the world. A chilling tale of lies, betrayal, and unthinkable murder. This is the story you won't be able to forget. Frederick, Colorado. A quiet, growing town about 30 miles north of Denver. Known for its family-friendly neighborhoods and wide-open skies, it was a kind of place where tragedy seemed far away. But on the morning of August 13, 2018, that peace was shattered. Chris Watts and his wife Shannon appeared from the outside to be living the American dream. A comfortable house in a new development. 2 young daughters, Bella and Celeste. A third child, a boy, on the way. Shannon, 34, worked from home promoting health products for a company called Thrive. She was energetic, outgoing, and very active on social media, regularly posting videos and photos of her family. Chris, 33, worked as an operator for Anadarko Petroleum. He was quiet, reserved, and often portrayed as the calmer, more laid-back counterpart to Shannon's high energy. They had been married since 2012, and by most accounts, seemed like a happy couple. But behind the cheerful Facebook posts and family outings, things were unraveling. Financial problems were mounting. They had filed for bankruptcy in 2015. The house they lived in was under financial strain. But even more troubling was the distance growing between them. Chris had begun an affair with a coworker, Nicole Kessinger. The affair started just weeks earlier, but quickly grew intense. Nicole later said she believed Chris was in the process of separating from Shannon. In early August, Shannon took the girls, Bella, 4, and Celeste, 3, on a summer trip to North Carolina to visit family. Chris stayed behind for work. During those 5 weeks apart, the emotional distance between the couple grew. Shannon sensed it. She texted friends that Chris had become cold, detached, barely responded to messages. She began to suspect another woman might be involved. Still, she hoped things could be repaired. On August 9th, Shannon flew to Arizona for a brief work trip. Her return was planned for the early hours of August 13th. Her friend and colleague, Nicole Atkinson, dropped her off at the airport, and she arrived home in Frederick around 1:48 a.m., as seen on a neighbor's surveillance camera. That would be the last time Shannon was seen alive. That Monday morning, Nicole Atkinson became worried. Shannon had missed an important medical appointment, her first prenatal checkup for her unborn son, who they planned to name Nico. Calls and texts to Shannon went unanswered. Nicole drove to the Watts home. Shannon's car was still in the garage, person side. But there was no answer at the door. Nicole called the police. At 1:40 p.m., Frederick Police Officer Scott Coonrod arrived to perform a wellness check. Chris arrived shortly after, claiming he'd left for work early and hadn't seen Shannon since around 5:15 a.m. He said she told him she was taking the girls to a friend's house. But something didn't add up. Shannon's phone was found tucked between the couch cushions. Her wedding ring was left on the bedside table. Her car, with the children's car seats, was still in the garage. Chris's explanations were vague and inconsistent. His demeanor was strangely calm, detached, even as officers walked through the house and Nicole paced outside, panicked. That same evening, Chris was interviewed by a local news crew on his front porch. He pleaded for Shannon and the girls to come home, his voice flat, his eyes dry. The video quickly made its way across the internet. To many viewers, something about his tone didn't feel right. It wasn't what he said. It was how he said it. As police began their investigation, they found surveillance footage from a neighbor's house showing Chris backing his truck into the driveway around 5:27 a.m. that Monday. He said he loaded his tools for work. But the footage showed him making multiple trips to the truck, something officers found unusual. In the same footage, there was no sign of Shannon or the children ever leaving the house. Chris voluntarily went to the police station for questioning the next day. Investigators noted his body language, arms crossed, answers rehearsed, emotions missing. He denied any involvement, insisting he had no idea where Shannon or the girls were. Detectives continued to press. They brought in a polygraph examiner. Before the test even started, the administrator told him bluntly, "This is your chance to tell the truth." The test was administered on August 15th. Chris failed, miserably. When the results were revealed to him, he buried his face in his hands. "I didn't lie to you," he whispered, but the room was silent. Detectives confronted him again. His story was unraveling. While the interrogation continued, police searched Chris's phone records and GPS data. They found text messages to Nicole Kessinger, calls, internet searches, deleted data. Nicole was contacted and quickly cooperated with the investigation. She told police she had asked Chris several times if he was divorced, and he insisted the separation was nearly final. She was stunned to learn Shanann had been pregnant and missing. Meanwhile, public attention on the case exploded. Shanann's frequent social media posts, videos of the girls dancing, Chris smiling, birthday parties, family vacations, were now contrasted with news reports and interrogation clips. It was the collision of image and reality. Viewers across the country became emotionally invested. This wasn't just a murder case. It felt like betrayal on the deepest level. A family so many admired online had been torn apart in the most horrifying way. On August 15th, as police continued questioning Chris at the station, he finally made a partial confession. But it wasn't the full truth. He claimed that after he told Shanann he wanted to separate, she had strangled the girls, and in a rage, he killed her. Detectives listened, but didn't believe him. Still, it was enough to arrest him. That same day, police obtained search warrants for the oil site where Chris worked. What they discovered would bring the case to its darkest point yet. Chris Watts had led a double life, one of happy smiles for the camera and one of growing deception. And now, the picture-perfect image of his family was shattered, replaced by horror, suspicion, and questions that no one yet had the full answers to. By the morning of August 16, 2018, the search for Shanann Watts and her two daughters had turned into something far more serious. Chris Watts, who only days earlier had stood on his porch begging for their return, was now under arrest. His vague explanation about a marriage falling apart had given way to something much darker. He admitted to killing Shanann, but claimed it was in a fit of rage after she had allegedly harmed their children. It was a version of events that investigators doubted from the start. Police quickly moved to verify the details of his new story. A team was dispatched to the remote oil site where Chris had worked, Survey 319, about 45 minutes from Frederick. It was there, on a desolate patch of land surrounded by tanks and scrub brush, that the truth finally came into focus. Searchers discovered a shallow grave containing the body of Shanann Watts. Not far from her burial site stood two large oil tanks. Inside each of them was the body of one of the girls. Bella and Celeste had been forced into the hatches of the tanks, their small bodies submerged in crude oil. The horror of it was staggering, even for seasoned officers. It was clear this wasn't a crime of passion. It was calculated, controlled, cold. News of the discovery broke quickly, and the country reacted with disbelief and anger. How could a father, someone seen in so many happy family videos, do something so unthinkable? It didn't make sense. But the deeper the investigation went, the more it revealed a man who had grown distant, detached, and secretive. Detectives reviewed Chris's phone activity leading up to the murders. Text messages to Nicole Kessinger revealed a man eager to start fresh. He searched for vacation spots, apartment listings, and even engagement rings, all while his pregnant wife was trying to save their marriage. In one message, Shanann poured her heart out, saying she didn't recognize him anymore. She wanted to fix what was broken. He responded with cold, one-word replies. Nicole, realizing she had been lied to, agreed to be interviewed by police. She had met Chris just a few months earlier and believed he was separated, possibly divorced. As the media swarmed her workplace and her name entered public conversation, she distanced herself completely. Her cooperation with police was swift and complete. She turned over her phone, shared search history, and expressed disbelief that the man she had briefly trusted could be capable of murder. Meanwhile, the public continued watching closely. Much of the fascination with the case came from Shanann's social media presence. She had documented her life thoroughly: vacations, birthdays, daily routines. The Watts family, to many, felt familiar, and that familiarity made the betrayal even more disturbing. The online reaction was intense. People studied bodycam footage from the officer's initial wellness check. They analyzed Chris's body language during news interviews. Every blink, every pause, every word was examined for hidden meaning. What they saw was a man seemingly unaffected by the loss of his wife and daughters. He didn't cry. He didn't break down. He didn't ask investigators to find who had taken them. He spoke in generalities, repeated phrases, and changed details in subtle ways. All signs pointed to guilt. As prosecutors prepared their case, they focused on building a timeline. Shanann returned home at 1:48 a.m., confirmed by the neighbor's surveillance camera. By morning, she was dead. Chris admitted to putting her body in his truck along with his 2 daughters, who, at that point, were still alive. He drove them over 40 miles to the oil site. During the ride, the girls asked about their mother. They rode in the back seat beside her wrapped body. At the site, he smothered Celeste with a blanket. Bella, the older daughter, reportedly pleaded for her life before he did the same to her. These were not acts of sudden violence. They were deliberate decisions, spaced out over time. Actions taken with awareness. In the days following the arrest, the Watts home became a focal point. Media crews lined the sidewalks. Neighbors, stunned and grieving, were hesitant to speak. The house itself, once the backdrop of happy family videos, now felt haunted by absence. Inside, investigators found signs of preparation. The sheets used to wrap Shanann. A cleaned-out bedroom. Nothing pointed to a spontaneous fight. Everything suggested premeditation. Back at the Frederick Police Department, investigators worked closely with the FBI and the Colorado Bureau of Investigation. Every detail was logged. Every inconsistency in Chris's story was challenged. They confronted him with the evidence: his cell phone data, the surveillance footage, the recovered bodies. He continued to dodge full responsibility. But the public didn't need a full confession to know what had happened. The timeline, the physical evidence, and Chris's behavior painted a clear enough picture. This wasn't a man driven by a sudden emotional outburst. It was a man who had decided, for reasons still unclear, that his family no longer fit into the life he wanted to create. And so he erased them. One of the most striking elements of the case was the way it blurred the line between image and reality. Shanann had spent years building a digital scrapbook of her family's life. Those videos showed a loving mother, 2 joyful little girls, and a husband who smiled for the camera. But behind those smiles was a growing silence. Friends later recalled how Shanann had confided in them that something had changed. Chris had grown colder, less engaged. He wasn't himself. She sensed the shift, but didn't understand its depth. The Watts case wasn't just about murder. It was about perception, about how people can present one version of themselves to the world while hiding another in the shadows. That contrast, the gap between the image and the reality, was what kept people watching, listening, and grieving. It was a story too tragic to ignore. By the time August turned to September, the prosecution had nearly everything it needed. The physical evidence, the digital trail, the interviews, it all pointed to one conclusion. But Chris's version of events remained incomplete. He continued to claim Shanann was to blame for the children's deaths. It was a narrative few believed, and one the evidence couldn't support. The world waited for the next development. The autopsy results. The court dates. The moment of reckoning. And as the weeks passed, the portrait of Chris Watts as a devoted father and husband faded entirely. In its place stood something far more chilling. A man who destroyed everything he had, not in a moment of madness, but through a series of calm, conscious decisions. The final part of the story would come in the courtroom. And there, at last, the truth would be fully revealed. In the weeks that followed his arrest, Chris Watts sat behind bars in Weld County Jail as the case against him continued to build. The court of public opinion had already delivered its verdict. His image as a family man had crumbled. Prosecutors, armed with overwhelming evidence, moved toward formal charges. The question was no longer whether Chris had killed his family. It was whether he would ever fully admit to what really happened. The charges were as severe as they come: 5 counts of first-degree murder, including one for the unborn child, Nico. Additional charges included unlawful termination of a pregnancy and 3 counts of tampering with a deceased human body. Colorado was a death penalty state at the time. If convicted at trial, Chris could face execution. The case had reached national attention, and Shanann's family, devastated and angry, prepared themselves for what lay ahead. Behind the scenes, defense attorneys began discussions with the district attorney's office. A trial would mean exposing graphic details, autopsy reports, and reliving the horror. It would also prolong the pain for everyone involved, especially the families of the victims. On November 6, 2018, in a courtroom packed with media, Shanann's family, and members of the public, Chris Watts pleaded guilty to all 9 charges. The decision came as part of a plea deal, one that removed the death penalty from the table in exchange for full admission. The plea hearing was quiet, tense. Chris stood, head down, wearing an orange jumpsuit and shackles. He spoke only to respond to the judge's questions with short, muted answers. Across the aisle, Shanann's parents, Frank and Sandra Razusek, sat stone-faced, holding back tears. The man who had once been their son-in-law, the man who had lived in their home, laughed at their table, married their daughter, was now admitting to wiping out their entire family. But even with the guilty plea, the full truth had yet to come out. The public still didn't know the real sequence of events. Chris had originally told investigators that he killed Shanann in a rage after she supposedly harmed the children, a lie that many knew didn't hold up. Then, just days after his sentencing, he gave investigators a detailed confession during a prison interview. It was worse than anyone imagined. He told them that on the night of August 12th, after Shanann returned from her business trip, the two had argued. She had suspected the affair and pressed him for answers. Around 4 a.m., as they lay in bed, he told her he no longer loved her, that he didn't want the baby. And then, without warning, he climbed on top of her and strangled her to death. While Shanann's lifeless body lay in the room, Bella and Celeste woke up. They wandered in, confused, asking what was wrong with their mother. Chris told them she wasn't feeling well. He then wrapped Shanann's body in a sheet and carried her down to the truck. The girls followed, holding blankets and climbing into the back seat. He drove for nearly an hour to the oil field, with his daughters beside their dead mother. Once there, he laid Shanann's body in the dirt and returned to the truck. He smothered Celeste first, using her favorite blanket. Then he turned to Bella. She fought. She screamed. According to his own account, her final words were, "Daddy, no." The cruelty of it was nearly impossible to comprehend. And it left investigators and the public wondering, why? Why would a man destroy his entire family? Chris said he felt trapped, that he wanted to be with Nickel, that he thought killing Shanann would make everything go away. But even his explanations sounded empty, emotionless. There was no clear motive, no one reason that made sense. Just a chilling decision to remove what he saw as obstacles to the life he wanted. On November 19, 2018, Chris Watts returned to court for sentencing. He faced a judge for the last time. The courtroom was silent as the district attorney read the details aloud. How Shanann fought for her life. How Bella watched her sister die. How Chris showed no signs of hesitation. No panic. Only methodical steps to dispose of his wife and children. Shanann's family gave emotional victim impact statements. Her father, Frank, spoke through tears, saying Chris had not only killed his daughter and grandchildren, but also the hope and trust their family once had. Her brother, Frankie, spoke directly to Chris. "You heartless monster. You carried them out like trash." Then it was time for sentencing. The judge, visibly shaken, addressed the court. He called the crimes the most inhumane and vicious act he had seen in his entire career. He sentenced Chris Watts to 5 life sentences without the possibility of parole, 3 consecutive, 2 concurrent. Additional years were added for unlawful termination of a pregnancy and for tampering with the bodies. Chris showed no visible emotion as the sentence was read. He was transferred to Dodge Correctional Institution in Waupun, Wisconsin, where he remains in protective custody, serving life behind bars. The story of the Watts family shocked the world not just because of its brutality, but because of how ordinary it seemed at first. A suburban family, a well-maintained home, smiling kids, a marriage that, though strained, looked normal from the outside. But underneath, a quiet collapse had taken hold. A man who could no longer face his responsibilities, who wanted something, or someone, else, chose destruction over honesty, finality over change. The case sparked global conversations about domestic violence, the dangers of double lives, and the warning signs so many people miss. Shannon, Bella, Celeste, and Nico became symbols of a deeper issue: how easily violence can hide behind routine, and how silence can turn deadly. Documentaries, interviews, and court records continued to uncover layers of the tragedy. But at its core, the story remained the same. A family who should have had their whole lives ahead of them, gone in a single morning. And a man whose betrayal stunned not only those closest to him, but strangers around the world. In the end, justice was delivered in a courtroom, but no sentence could undo what was lost. Shannon's voice, once full of optimism, had been silenced. Bella and Celeste's laughter, captured in home videos, now echoed only in memory. What remained were questions, sorrow, and the haunting truth that no one ever truly knows what goes on behind closed doors. A young couple sets out on a dream road trip across America, but only one returns. What begins as an Instagram-perfect adventure unravels into a chilling true crime mystery that grips the world. Behind every photo was a secret. This is the story of love, control, silence, and a haunting disappearance. In July 2021, Gabby Petito and Brian Laundrie set off on a cross-country road trip. They were a young, engaged couple from the East Coast. Gabby, 22, was from Blue Point, New York, and Brian, 23, lived in Northport, Florida. They packed up Gabby's converted white Ford Transit van and began what was supposed to be a months-long journey across the American West, visiting national parks and living the van life dream. Gabby was a travel influencer who shared her experiences on Instagram and YouTube. Her online presence was filled with scenic views, road trip snapshots, and moments that, on the surface, looked joyful and carefree. The couple had started a YouTube channel titled Nomadic Static, hoping to grow an audience by showcasing their travels. To the outside world, their life on the road seemed adventurous and inspiring. But behind the curated posts and carefully edited videos, tension simmered. From the beginning, the trip wasn't as smooth as it appeared online. Friends and family later reported that Gabby and Brian had a volatile relationship, with frequent arguments and emotional ups and downs. As the weeks passed, signs of stress became harder to ignore. On August 12th, the couple had a public altercation in Moab, Utah, that drew the attention of both a witness and local authorities. A 911 caller told police they had seen Brian hitting Gabby near a grocery store. When officers pulled them over shortly after, their body cam footage showed a teary and visibly shaken Gabby. Brian had scratches on his face. Gabby said she had been under a lot of stress and blamed herself for the argument. The police decided not to arrest either of them. Instead, they separated the two for the night. Gabby stayed with the van while Brian was taken to a nearby hotel. No charges were filed. The incident was documented and later reviewed by law enforcement, but at the time, it was treated as a case of emotional distress, not physical danger. After that event, the couple continued their journey. They visited several national parks, including Bryce Canyon and Grand Teton. Gabby continued to post travel updates on social media, though they became less frequent. Her last confirmed post was on August 25th. She shared photos from Utah and appeared happy, but by then, something had changed. Around August 27th, Gabby's mother, Nicole Schmidt, received a strange text message from her daughter's phone. It read, "Can you help Stan? I just keep getting his voicemails and missed calls." Nicole found it odd. Gabby never referred to her grandfather as Stan. It didn't sound like her. That message would become a key clue in establishing the timeline of Gabby's disappearance. The same day, witnesses reported seeing Brian and Gabby at a restaurant in Jackson, Wyoming. According to accounts from staff and patrons, Brian was visibly angry and arguing with waiters over the bill. Gabby appeared embarrassed and upset, crying as she tried to calm him down. It was the last time anyone publicly saw her alive. Then silence. Calls and texts from Gabby's family went unanswered. Her social media went quiet. Days passed with no word. On September 1st, Brian Laundrie returned home to Florida in Gabby's white van, alone. He did not contact Gabby's family. He did not speak to the police. He gave no explanation for Gabby's absence. For 10 days, he remained silent, living at his parents' home in Northport. The van, parked in the driveway, was later seized by police. On September 11th, Gabby's mother officially reported her missing to Suffolk County Police in New York. The case quickly gained public attention. Gabby's disappearance struck a chord, especially among young women and followers of true crime media. She had been documenting her travels online, and now those same followers became digital detectives. People combed through her social media, watched her YouTube video frame by frame, and even analyzed footage from other travelers who had been in the same area. The pressure on Brian and his family increased rapidly. Reporters camped outside the Laundrie home. Protesters showed up with signs demanding justice. Still, Brian refused to talk. His parents issued a brief statement through their lawyer, saying they hoped Gabby would be found and that they were remaining in the background. That silence only deepened public suspicion. On September 14th, Brian was named a person of interest in Gabby's disappearance. 3 days later, on September 17th, his parents reported him missing. They claimed he had gone hiking in the nearby Carlton Reserve 3 days earlier and hadn't returned. This revelation raised more questions than answers. While the Petito family and law enforcement had been searching for Gabby, Brian had vanished too. The case exploded in the media. National networks, online forums, podcasts, and social media users all joined the search effort. Every update was followed closely. Drone footage, police briefings, and search maps were shared online. Internet users even helped narrow down locations based on timestamps and Instagram tags. Then, on September 19th, the worst fears were confirmed. Human remains were discovered in Wyoming's Bridger-Teton National Forest, near the area where the van had been seen on August 27th. The FBI later confirmed that the remains belonged to Gabby Petito. The coroner determined the cause of death was homicide by manual strangulation. Based on decomposition, she had likely died 3 to 4 weeks before the discovery, putting the date of death around the last week of August. By then, Brian had already been missing for several days. Law enforcement began searching the Carlton Reserve, a vast and swampy park in Florida that spanned over 24,000 acres. The terrain was challenging, dense, wet, and full of alligators and snakes. The search involved drones, dive teams, and cadaver dogs. But for weeks, nothing turned up. On September 23rd, a federal arrest warrant was issued, not for murder, but for unauthorized use of a debit card. Investigators alleged that Brian had used Gabby's bank card to withdraw over $1,000 between August 30th and September 1st. It was a strategic move to increase pressure and widen legal options while the manhunt continued. As the search dragged on, the public was left with questions. Why had Brian gone silent? What did his parents know? And what had really happened on the road between Utah and Florida? As those questions mounted, so did the attention. The case became more than a missing person story. It became a cultural moment, a case dissected in real time by millions of people worldwide. By the end of September, 2 people were gone, 1 confirmed dead and 1 missing. What started as a couple's journey to document their dream life had turned into a tragedy. The final answers were still out there, buried under silence and swamp water. As September turned into October, the Gabby Petito case remained front and center in national headlines. The story had become a puzzle that people everywhere wanted to solve. Each piece that emerged brought more urgency and more confusion. Gabby's body had been found, the cause of death was confirmed, and Brian Laundrie was still missing. Public scrutiny intensified. The Laundrie family, particularly Brian's parents, Christopher and Roberta, became the subject of harsh criticism. Many questioned their silence and refusal to speak directly with Gabby's family. To the public, their behavior seemed cold and evasive. Why didn't they reach out to Gabby's parents when their son returned home without her? Why had they waited days to report Brian missing? These questions added to the mystery and outrage. At the center of this storm was the Carlton Reserve in Sarasota County, Florida. That's where Brian's parents said he had gone hiking on September 13th, just 2 days after Gabby was reported missing. Law enforcement had been combing through the vast and difficult terrain for weeks with no success. Water levels were high. The land was thick with brush, mud, and wildlife. The search was grueling, but the FBI and local authorities persisted. Meanwhile, online investigators, amateur sleuths, and true crime followers kept the case alive on social media. TikTokers posted theories, timelines, and drone footage. Reddit threads dissected Brian's past behavior, social media posts, and body language in the police video from Moab. Many believed Brian's disappearance was not an accident. Some suspected his parents had helped him escape. Others believed he had died by suicide in the swamp. Theories spread quickly, often blurring the lines between fact and speculation. But while the online frenzy grew louder, law enforcement stuck to methodical searches and forensic investigation. With Gabby's cause of death determined to be manual strangulation, there was no doubt that she had been murdered. The timeline became crucial. The coroner had stated she likely died 3 to 4 weeks before her body was discovered on September 19th, placing her death sometime around August 27th. That meant Brian returned to Florida just days after her likely murder. Investigators began piecing together the timeline using digital footprints. Cell phone records, bank transactions, surveillance footage, and eyewitness reports became key. The FBI reviewed traffic camera footage that showed the white van traveling back toward Florida. They discovered Brian had returned home on September 1st. Afterward, he went camping with his parents at a nearby park called Fort DeSoto. That trip, taken between September 6th and 7th, added another strange chapter to the story. It raised the possibility that the family had tried to spend time together, or even help Brian, before the media storm hit. The Petito family, devastated and desperate for answers, remained vocal. Gabby's parents and step-parents appeared in interviews, pleading for help. They asked the Laundrie family to cooperate. They demanded justice. Their grief resonated with the public. The image of Gabby's smiling face, young, adventurous, full of life, became a symbol for missing persons across the country. On October 12th, the Teton County coroner officially announced Gabby's cause of death, manual strangulation and blunt force trauma to the head and neck. It was ruled a homicide. The report also confirmed that her body had been exposed to the elements for 3 to 4 weeks. That confirmed what many already feared. Gabby had likely been killed not long after she was last seen in Wyoming, and long before Brian returned to Florida. By mid-October, over a month had passed since Brian had disappeared. The search at Carlton Reserve continued, but many believed it had gone cold. The terrain had made it difficult from the start, and the wet conditions had further complicated the search. Skeptics wondered whether Brian was even there. Maybe he had escaped farther. Maybe he had help. Maybe he was hiding in plain sight. Without solid evidence, everything remained uncertain. Then, a development changed the course of the investigation. On October 20th, Brian's parents informed the FBI that they planned to visit the Myakkahatchee Creek Environmental Park, which bordered the Carlton Reserve. They said they wanted to look for Brian themselves. That morning, they met law enforcement at the site. Not long after, some of Brian's personal belongings were found, specifically a dry bag and a notebook. Nearby, skeletal remains were also discovered. The area had previously been underwater due to flooding, but had recently dried out, making the remains visible. The location raised eyebrows. It was not far from where the search had begun weeks earlier. Critics questioned how the parents found the items so quickly, in an area that had supposedly already been searched. But the FBI confirmed the items belonged to Brian. Over the next few days, forensic testing began. On October 21st, the FBI announced that the human remains found were consistent with Brian Laundrie. Dental records confirmed the match. The search for Brian had come to an end, though not in the way many had hoped. Now, instead of waiting for an arrest or trial, the case shifted to closing the loop, understanding what had happened and why. With Brian dead, attention turned to the items found near his body, especially the notebook. Authorities handled it carefully. It had been water damaged, but was partially recoverable. What it contained would later provide the only first-hand account of what happened to Gabby. In the days following the discovery, the mood shifted. There would be no confession in court, no cross-examinations, no justice in the traditional sense. Gabby's family had lost their daughter. Brian's parents had lost their son. But many still wanted answers. People wanted to know what the notebook said, whether it contained the truth or just a version of it. By the end of October, the FBI confirmed that Brian had died by suicide from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. His remains were skeletal, scattered in the brush, but his identity was confirmed. The notebook, along with a revolver and a backpack, were recovered and examined. The details would not be released immediately, but the public would eventually learn what Brian had written in his final words. The case of Gabby Petito and Brian Laundrie had become one of the most followed stories of the year. It had captured global attention not just because of the mystery, but because of what it revealed about social media, domestic violence, and the way modern true crime unfolds. A young woman's disappearance had turned into a nationwide investigation, powered by digital detectives and real-world search teams alike. The discovery of Brian Laundrie's remains in October 2021 brought an end to the physical search, but not to the questions surrounding the Gabby Petito case. With both Gabby and Brian gone, the focus turned to understanding what had happened between them, what had led to Gabby's death, and what Brian had to say about it. The answers investigators believed might lie in the weathered notebook found near his body. After forensic recovery and analysis, the FBI confirmed that the notebook contained a written confession from Brian Laundrie. In his own words, Brian admitted to killing Gabby. He described it not as a cold-blooded murder, but as a so-called act of mercy. According to the note, Gabby had been injured during their trip. He claimed she was in extreme pain, freezing, and that he killed her to put her out of her misery. He said she had fallen and was suffering, and that the decision was made out of compassion. But authorities made it clear that this version of events was not supported by the evidence. Gabby had been strangled. There was no sign of an accident or fall. The coroner's report showed clear signs of a violent death, with injuries consistent with manual strangulation and blunt force trauma. There was no trace of the kind of physical injuries Brian described. His explanation, officials said, appeared more like an attempt to justify his actions than a factual account. The confession gave a glimpse into his mindset, but didn't change the facts. Gabby had been murdered, and Brian Laundrie was solely responsible. In January 2022, the FBI officially closed the case. In their final statement, they confirmed that Brian Laundrie had admitted to killing Gabby Petito in the notebook, and that no other individuals were involved in her death. The investigation had gathered sufficient evidence to conclude the case, even though there would be no trial. Alongside the written confession, investigators had found Brian's personal belongings, his revolver, and digital data tying him to Gabby's murder and to the unauthorized use of her debit card. Gabby's family, while devastated, expressed a sense of closure. They had endured months of pain, searching, waiting, and grieving in public view. The confirmation of Brian's confession, while not delivering justice in a courtroom, gave them some answers. Her parents, Nicole Schmidt and Joseph Petito, spoke publicly about their heartbreak, but also about their commitment to honoring Gabby's memory. Out of the tragedy, they created the Gabby Petito Foundation, a nonprofit aimed at supporting organizations that help locate missing people and provide resources for victims of domestic violence. They began speaking out about the warning signs of abusive relationships, hoping to prevent others from experiencing the same loss. Gabby's case became more than just a headline. It became a call to action. Meanwhile, the Laundrie family remained largely silent. Through their attorney, they expressed sympathy for Gabby's family, but avoided direct interviews or detailed public statements. Their handling of the situation, particularly their decision not to speak to police early in the investigation, remained controversial. Some saw their silence as an effort to protect their son. Others viewed it as obstruction. But with no charges filed against them, and with Brian's death confirmed, no legal action was taken. The case also sparked larger conversations about media bias and the coverage of missing persons. Many pointed out how Gabby's story received massive attention, in part due to her appearance, social media presence, and background. Advocates for missing people of color and Indigenous women used the moment to highlight disparities in how such cases are reported and investigated. The term missing white woman syndrome gained traction in public discourse, urging media outlets and law enforcement to take a broader, more equitable approach in future cases. In the months that followed, documentaries, podcasts, and news specials continued to explore every aspect of the story: how the couple met, how their relationship changed, and how their travels turned into tragedy. But for those closest to Gabby, the spotlight was both a burden and a tool. Her family used the platform to raise awareness, while also asking for privacy as they continued to heal. What began as a road trip across America had ended with 2 young lives lost. Gabby and Brian were supposed to be celebrating their freedom, building memories, and sharing them with the world. Instead, their story became a symbol of how quickly love can turn to violence, and how appearances can be deceiving. Gabby's story resonated so deeply because it reflected a hidden reality. She was young, vibrant, and appeared happy in photos and videos. But the signs of emotional distress and control were there, and they became clearer in hindsight. The Moab police encounter, the emotional breakdowns, the strange text messages, they all pointed to a relationship in crisis. The tragedy exposed how difficult it can be to detect abuse, especially when it's masked by a polished online presence. In the end, there was no courtroom, no jury, no sentencing. Brian Laundrie's confession, scrawled in a notebook found beside his remains, was the closest thing to an answer the world would receive. He took responsibility in writing, but avoided the consequences in life. He left behind more questions than answers, and a family forever broken. The Gabby Petito case will be remembered not only for its tragic outcome, but for how it unfolded in the public eye. It was a story told through Instagram filters and FBI updates, through body cam footage and social media timelines. It became a case study in modern crime solving, one shaped by digital footprints, online detectives, and a world that watched in real time. Gabby Petito should have returned home. She should have had a future filled with adventure, creativity, and love. Instead, her name became part of a national conversation, a conversation about domestic violence, media awareness, and the unseen struggles people face behind closed doors. Her voice, though silenced, continues to speak through the legacy her family has built. And through that legacy, Gabby's story may yet save lives. A devoted Mormon, a beautiful photographer, and a deadly obsession. When Travis Alexander was found brutally murdered in his own shower, the truth behind his on-again, off-again romance with Jodi Arias shocked the world. What began as love turned into lies, rage, and one of the most gripping trials in history. In the fall of 2006, 2 lives intersected at a business convention in Las Vegas, an event that would eventually spiral into one of the most shocking true crime cases in American history. Travis Alexander, a 30-year-old motivational speaker and sales representative for prepaid legal services, was known for his energy, charisma, and devout Mormon faith. He had overcome a troubled childhood and was now focused on building a successful future. Jodi Arias, then 28 years old, was a struggling photographer and waitress from California. She was attractive, intelligent, and eager to find a deeper connection, both emotionally and spiritually. Their meeting at the conference was electric. Travis, outgoing and confident, found himself drawn to Jodi's beauty and charm. Jodi, in turn, was captivated by Travis's ambition and strong moral image. Despite living in different states, Travis in Arizona, Jodi in California. They quickly began a long-distance romantic relationship. Just 2 months later, in November 2006, Jodi converted to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, a significant step made in an effort to be closer to Travis and align with his religious values. The relationship, however, was unstable from the start. Beneath the surface, there were deep incompatibilities. While Travis was serious about his faith and longed for a Mormon wife he could take to the temple, he also found himself giving in to the physical temptation of his relationship with Jodi. For Travis, this caused guilt and inner conflict. For Jodi, it meant she believed there was still hope for a future with him. By mid-2007, Travis had decided to end the relationship officially. Still, their connection didn't end. They continued to communicate regularly, and their physical relationship persisted. Despite the breakup, Travis began dating other women, searching for someone who could be his wife, while Jodi struggled to accept her new role in his life. Her feelings began to spiral from affection into obsession. Without being asked, Jodi moved from California to Mesa, Arizona, where Travis lived. She rented a place nearby and tried to stay involved in his life, even though he wasn't interested in rekindling their romance. Eventually, when the tension between them became too much, Jodi moved back to Yreka, California. But even from hundreds of miles away, she kept a close watch on Travis, reading his emails, checking his social media, and even sneaking into his home uninvited. By 2008, Travis had moved on emotionally and spiritually. He was preparing for a future that didn't include Jodi. That spring, he was looking forward to a company trip to Cancun, Mexico, with a woman named Mimi Hall, a fellow Mormon and a platonic friend he hoped to pursue romantically. Jodi found out about the trip and was devastated. Travis was leaving her behind, and the idea of him traveling with another woman ignited a dangerous mix of jealousy, rage, and desperation. In late May 2008, Jodi began making plans. She rented a car, bought 2 gas cans to avoid stopping for fuel where her presence might be tracked, dyed her hair brown, and turned off her phone or placed it on airplane mode for long stretches of time. On June 2nd, she left California under the guise of visiting friends. Her final destination, Travis Alexander's home in Mesa. The following day, June 3rd, she stopped in Salt Lake City, Utah, to see an old flame, Ryan Burns. They spent time together, kissed, and he noticed that she had dyed her hair and had bandages on her hands. She gave vague explanations. She seemed calm. What happened in between her departure from Yreka and her arrival in Utah would become the centerpiece of a brutal murder investigation. On June 4, 2008, Jodi arrived at Travis's house. The exact timeline remains uncertain, but what is clear is that the visit began peacefully. They had sex. They took photos, some nude, some in the shower, using Travis's new digital camera. Then, something went terribly wrong. Around 5:30 p.m., the last known photo of Travis alive was taken. He was in the shower, looking directly at the camera. Moments later, chaos erupted. According to the evidence, Jodi attacked him, stabbing him 27 times, slicing his throat from ear to ear, and finally shooting him in the head. Blood covered the bathroom floor, the sink, and the hallway. Travis fought back, but he was overpowered. After the killing, Jodi attempted to clean up the scene. She deleted photos from the camera and put it in the washing machine, hoping it would erase any trace of her presence. She also washed blood from her hands and tried to remove her footprints from the scene. But crucial evidence remained. She then continued her drive to Utah, meeting up with Ryan Burns and acting as if nothing had happened. She told him she had gotten lost, which is why she was late. She smiled, flirted, and never mentioned that she had just left the scene of a violent homicide. Back in Mesa, Travis's friends grew worried when they couldn't reach him. On June 9th, several of them went to his house. His roommate let them in. The smell led them to the upstairs bathroom, where they discovered his decomposing body in the shower. Police were called immediately. Investigators found blood all over the scene. In the washing machine, they recovered the camera and managed to retrieve the deleted images, which revealed not only the moments of intimacy between Travis and Jodi, but also disturbing images believed to have been taken during or just after the attack, including one blurry image showing Travis's body bleeding on the floor. As the investigation began, Jodi was not an immediate suspect. She spoke with police voluntarily, claiming she hadn't seen Travis in weeks. But her story quickly fell apart. Evidence from the recovered camera, along with phone records, car rental data, and surveillance footage, placed her at the scene. Police also discovered a bloody palm print on the wall, containing a mix of both Travis and Jodi's DNA. The turning point was fast approaching. When confronted with a mountain of evidence, Jodi began to change her story. At first, she denied being in Arizona. Then, she claimed two masked intruders had broken in and killed Travis while she escaped. Eventually, she admitted she had killed him, but claimed it was in self-defense. Despite her efforts to avoid arrest, the evidence told a different story. On July 15, 2008, Jodi Arias was arrested and charged with the murder of Travis Alexander. But the story was far from over. The trial that followed would grip the nation, drawing millions of viewers with its shocking revelations, emotional testimony, and a defendant whose behavior continued to captivate and confuse the public. The arrest of Jodi Arias in July 2008 marked the beginning of a long and complex legal battle that would take years to fully unfold. As investigators and prosecutors began building their case, the pieces started falling into place. The evidence against Jodi was extensive and damning: blood evidence, time-stamped photographs, and her own shifting stories. Yet, even with the mountain of proof, the case would prove anything but straightforward. Initially held in Yreka, California, Jodi waived extradition and was transferred to Arizona to face charges. She pleaded not guilty to first-degree murder. From the outset, she maintained her innocence, claiming no involvement in Travis Alexander's death. Her story would change again soon enough. Police had already unearthed a critical discovery: the digital camera recovered from Travis's washing machine. Despite her efforts to destroy the contents, forensic experts were able to retrieve deleted photos. These images became central to the case. They included time-stamped pictures of Jodi and Travis together in the bedroom on the afternoon of June 4, 2008. Just minutes later, new photos showed a wounded Travis on the bathroom floor. One final, blurred image, snapped accidentally, it seemed, captured Jodi's leg and Travis bleeding. These photos served as a timeline, narrowing the window of the murder to just a few short minutes. Even more telling was the DNA evidence. A bloody palm print on the bathroom wall was tested and revealed to contain both Jodi's and Travis's blood, undeniable proof she was at the crime scene during the attack. A spent bullet casing found on the floor matched the caliber of a handgun reported stolen from Jodi's grandparents' home just days before the killing. In the trunk of her rental car, police found traces of blood and hair. Jodi's version of events continued to evolve under pressure. After denying being in Arizona altogether, she claimed she had been there, but only as a witness. According to her second story, two unknown assailants, a man and a woman wearing masks, broke into Travis's home, attacked him, and let her go. When pressed for details, she failed to explain why she hadn't called 911 or told anyone about the supposed killers. Her calm behavior after the crime further weakened this claim. Eventually, in a recorded interview with detectives, Jodi changed her story again. This time, she admitted to killing Travis, but insisted it wasn't self-defense. According to this new narrative, Travis became enraged after she dropped his camera, and she was forced to defend herself. She said he attacked her, and, in a panic, she fought back. This version of events would become the foundation of her legal defense, but for investigators and prosecutors, the evidence told a different story, one of premeditation, rage, and calculated murder. Jodi's behavior following the murder also raised red flags. In the days after Travis's death, she continued her road trip to Utah, where she spent time with Ryan Burns. He later testified that Jodi acted completely normal, even flirtatious. She wore long sleeves to cover her bandaged hands and offered no explanation for her injuries. They kissed, talked, and even made plans to meet again. Ryan had no idea that just hours before, Jodi had committed one of the most gruesome murders in Arizona's recent history. Meanwhile, Travis's friends and family were devastated. He was described as generous, driven, and deeply committed to his faith. His loved ones found it hard to believe that someone he once cared for could end his life so violently. They spoke publicly about the impact of his loss and vowed to seek justice. It would take nearly 5 years for the case to reach trial. The delay was caused by a series of legal motions, witness issues, and scheduling conflicts. During this time, Jodi remained in custody, awaiting her fate. As details of the case slowly leaked to the media, public interest grew. When the trial finally began in January 2013, it was broadcast live, turning into a courtroom drama watched by millions. The prosecution, led by Juan Martinez, presented a powerful argument. Jodi Arias planned Travis Alexander's murder. They claimed she drove to his home with the intention of killing him, bringing the gas cans, gun, and knife as part of a premeditated plot. The deleted photos, bloody handprint, stolen weapon, and inconsistent stories all pointed to guilt. They painted a picture of a jealous and possessive ex-girlfriend who couldn't accept being rejected. Travis had moved on. He was preparing for his trip to Mexico with another woman. And Jodi, unable to let go, lashed out in the most extreme way. To drive the point home, the prosecution showed graphic images from a crime scene. Jurors saw the blood-soaked hallway, the deep stab wounds, and the final photo of Travis in the shower, moments before the attack. The brutality of the killing suggested not self-defense, but rage. Travis had been stabbed 27 times, his throat nearly decapitated, and finally shot in the head. Prosecutors argued that this level of violence went far beyond what could be considered defensive. Jodi's defense team, led by attorney Kirk Nurmi, told a different story. They described Jodi as a victim of abuse, emotionally, physically, and sexually. Their case rested on the claim that Travis had a dark side, hidden from the outside world. They introduced journal entries, text messages, and recorded calls between the two to support their argument. The most shocking part of the trial came when Jodi herself took the stand. Over 18 days of testimony, she laid out her version of events in detail. She described her relationship with Travis as filled with manipulation, lies, and control. She claimed that he had become increasingly violent and that she feared for her life. Her testimony was graphic and emotional, at times tearful, at times composed. But her time on the stand also raised new questions. Her memory appeared selective. She couldn't recall key moments during the murder. She admitted to lying repeatedly, to police, to friends, to Travis's family. When asked why she had changed her story so many times, she responded simply, "Because I was ashamed and I was scared." Observers were divided. Some believed her. Others saw through her performance. The trial became a media frenzy. True crime shows, news outlets, and online forums covered every detail. Cameras inside the courtroom broadcast her every word, gesture, and expression to the public. The jury listened intently, but the case was far from over. More than 200 pieces of evidence were presented, and dozens of witnesses were called, including expert psychologists, law enforcement, friends, and family members. As both sides made their case, the public continued to watch, fascinated by the tragic unraveling of two lives once briefly intertwined by love. And at the heart of it all was the central question: was this a planned and cold-blooded murder, or a desperate act of self-defense? The answer would soon be revealed in the final chapter of this long and painful trial. As the trial entered its final phase in early 2013, the courtroom drama surrounding the murder of Travis Alexander reached a boiling point. After weeks of testimony, emotional revelations, and national media coverage, the jury prepared to decide Jodi Arias's fate. The prosecution had painted her as a calculated killer who planned and executed a brutal murder out of jealousy and revenge. The defense had tried to present her as a victim, abused, scared, and acting in self-defense. But as the closing arguments unfolded, the facts weighed heavily in favor of the prosecution. The sheer violence of the attack was undeniable: 27 stab wounds, a slashed throat, and a gunshot to the head. The recovered photographs, taken just minutes before and after the killing, served as a silent but damning witness. The trail of evidence: gas cans to conceal travel stops, a stolen handgun, the camera dumped in the washing machine, and blood evidence formed a chilling timeline of events. Prosecutor Juan Martinez was relentless in his final address to the jury. He reminded them of the brutality Travis suffered, arguing that Jodi Arias not only intended to kill him, but did so in the most personal, vicious way imaginable. He pointed to her lies, her calculated behavior, and the attempt to cover her tracks. There was no panic, he argued. No mistake. It was a deliberate and well-planned execution. On the other side, defense attorney Kirk Nurmi pleaded for understanding. He urged jurors to consider the emotional damage Jodi claimed she had endured and framed the killing as a chaotic moment driven by fear. He asked them to look beyond the horror of the scene and try to understand what led her there. His client, he said, was not a monster, but a damaged woman who snapped. The jury deliberated for 4 days. On May 8, 2013, the courtroom fell silent as the verdict was read: guilty of first-degree murder. Jodi Arias sat still, showing no visible emotion. The courtroom erupted, some in gasps, others in tears. Travis Alexander's family, who had sat through every day of the trial, wept openly. It was the moment they had waited for since 2008. Justice had finally caught up with the woman who took their brother and son away. But the trial was not over. Arizona law required a separate sentencing phase for first-degree murder. The same jury would now decide whether Jodi would face the death penalty. During the penalty phase, Travis's family gave heartbreaking victim impact statements. His siblings spoke about the trauma, the sleepless nights, and the permanent scars left behind by his brutal death. They described the bright, hopeful man Travis had been, the younger brother who rose above a hard childhood, built a life of purpose, and had it stolen in the most violent way imaginable. The prosecution argued for death. The crime, they said, was especially cruel. Travis had been alive and conscious for much of the attack. He had fought for his life, suffered, and died in terror. For that, they said, Jodi should pay with her own life. But the jury could not agree. After hours of deliberation, they returned deadlocked. The result was a mistrial in the sentencing phase. Arizona law allowed for a new jury to be selected for a retrial on sentencing alone. Jodi remained in custody while the process began again. In 2015, nearly 2 years after the guilty verdict, a second jury was selected to determine her sentence. Once again, the evidence was presented, and once again, the jurors heard from both sides. Jodi herself made a final plea, this time directly to the jury. She admitted to killing Travis, expressed some level of remorse, and asked for mercy. She claimed she wanted to spend her life behind bars helping others, rather than being executed. She even created artwork and donated her hair to charity while in jail, efforts some viewed as genuine, others as manipulative. The second jury also failed to reach a unanimous decision. This time, under Arizona law, the death penalty was off the table. The decision now rested with Judge Sherry Stevens. On April 13, 2015, nearly 7 years after the murder, she sentenced Jodi Arias to life in prison without the possibility of parole. She would spend the rest of her life behind bars. Jodi was transferred to the Arizona Department of Corrections, where she remains to this day. The conclusion of the case brought closure to some, but not peace. Travis's family continued to speak publicly about the pain of losing him and the emotional toll the long trial had taken on their lives. For them, the wounds left by his death could never fully heal. In the years that followed, the case remained in the public eye. True crime documentaries, podcasts, and books revisited the events again and again. The trial had become a cultural moment, a cautionary tale about obsession, lies, and the deadly consequences of a toxic relationship. Jodi Arias became a household name, not for fame or achievement, but as a symbol of how a relationship gone wrong can spiral into violence. Her courtroom behavior, which ranged from flirtatious to coldly analytical, became part of the case's dark allure. From her infamous mugshot to her TV interviews, she left a lasting imprint on America's true crime landscape. But at the center of it all was Travis Victor Alexander, a young man full of promise, taken in the prime of his life. His friends remembered him for his humor, kindness, and unshakable drive. His family remembered him as a fighter, a survivor, and a light in their lives. While the trial focused so heavily on his death, those who knew him worked hard to ensure that his life would not be forgotten. In the end, the murder of Travis Alexander by Jodi Arias was not just a courtroom spectacle or a headline-grabbing case. It was a tragedy rooted in obsession, betrayal, and escalating control. It served as a grim reminder of what can happen when boundaries are crossed, when warning signs are ignored, and when love turns into possession. Justice, though slow and painful, had been served. But the echoes of that June day in 2008, inside a quiet house in Mesa, Arizona, would linger for years to come. On Christmas Eve 2002, a glowing young mother-to-be vanished, without a trace. Her husband's story didn't add up, and what followed exposed lies, betrayal, and a chilling truth beneath a perfect life. This is the haunting case that gripped a nation and ended in a stunning courtroom verdict. Modesto, California, a quiet, suburban town where nothing seemed out of place. It was the kind of community where people knew their neighbors, and where the excitement of the holidays brought warmth to every street. But on the morning of December 24, 2002, that peace was shattered. Laci Denise Peterson was 27 years old, glowing with the anticipation of becoming a mother. She was 8 months pregnant, due in just a few weeks. Laci had spent the day before preparing for Christmas. She visited her sister, Amy Rocha, at a nearby salon and then came home to wrap gifts. She was excited about the future. Her son, whom she and her husband Scott planned to name Connor, was nearly here. Scott Lee Peterson, then 30, was a fertilizer salesman. He and Laci had been married since 1997 and appeared, from the outside, to have a picture-perfect life. They lived in a cozy single-story home on Covina Avenue. Friends and family described them as a happy couple, ready to start their next chapter as parents. Scott was described as charming and confident, a man who seemed to love his wife and was looking forward to fatherhood. But by Christmas Eve morning, something had changed. According to Scott, he last saw Laci around 9:30 a.m. that day. She was planning to take their dog, Mackenzie, for a walk in the neighborhood park. Scott told police he decided to go fishing alone at the Berkeley Marina, about 90 miles away, in San Francisco Bay. He said he left home around 10 a.m., towing a small boat, and returned that afternoon to find the house empty. When he arrived, Mackenzie was outside, leash still on, wandering alone in the yard. Laci's car was in the driveway. Her purse, keys, and cell phone were still in the house. But she was gone. Scott called his mother-in-law, Sharon Rocha, to ask if Laci was with her. She wasn't. Soon after, the family reported Laci missing. That evening, police officers arrived at the Peterson home. Neighbors joined the search immediately. Volunteers, family, and friends fanned out across Modesto, putting up flyers and calling Laci's name through parks and streets. A pregnant woman vanishing on Christmas Eve was unsettling. The case spread through local media almost instantly. Within days, it became national news. Laci's family was heartbroken but determined. Sharon Rocha and her husband Ron Gransky were deeply involved in the search. Amy Rocha, Laci's sister, was constantly by their side. Laci was close with her family, and her disappearance devastated them. Every interview they gave showed their desperation and hope. Meanwhile, the police started asking questions. And something about Scott didn't sit right. In the days after Laci's disappearance, his calm demeanor stood out. While the Rocha family wept during interviews and clung to hope, Scott appeared cold, detached. He avoided the cameras and at times gave conflicting information. Detectives noticed his answers lacked emotion. The public began to wonder, why was the husband so distant? Investigators learned more. Scott hadn't gone fishing in the morning, as he claimed, until the night before. He said he decided to fish for sturgeon, but the gear he brought didn't match the type of fish he supposedly targeted. He also couldn't remember what bait he used. Details like these stood out to detectives like Albrocchini and John Bueller from the Modesto Police Department. But the most damning discovery came in early January 2003. A woman named Amber Fry, 27 years old, came forward. She was a massage therapist from Fresno, and she had been dating Scott Peterson. Amber had no idea Laci was missing. She had been told by Scott that he was single. In fact, that he was a widower. He claimed his wife had died. He said this before December 24th. Amber was stunned. When she learned about Laci's disappearance, she contacted the police. She agreed to cooperate fully. With her help, detectives recorded phone calls between Amber and Scott. These conversations, collected over weeks, revealed a different side of Scott Peterson. He was manipulative, smooth, and focused on keeping Amber from suspecting anything. Even while the nation was looking for his pregnant wife, Scott was calling Amber from candlelight vigils, pretending to be traveling abroad. It was a major break in the case, and it changed everything. The public, already suspicious of Scott, now turned on him. Media outlets ran stories about the affair, about his behavior, about his lies. Protesters gathered outside his home. He was no longer the quiet, grieving husband. He was the prime suspect. The pressure mounted. Still, Laci was missing. And there was no body. Police needed physical evidence. They searched the San Francisco Bay, using sonar and dive teams to explore the waters near where Scott said he went fishing. Nothing turned up for months. But they kept digging. Neighbors were interviewed again. Laci's last steps were retraced. The media kept the case in the spotlight. And the Rocha family never stopped speaking out. Then, on April 13, 2003, a couple walking along the shore of the San Francisco Bay in Richmond discovered a small body, the remains of a newborn boy. The next day, a second body was found nearby, that of an adult woman, badly decomposed, missing limbs, but still wearing maternity clothing. The location was less than 2 miles from the Berkeley Marina, where Scott said he had gone fishing. Authorities were cautious, but they suspected what the public already feared. DNA confirmed it days later. The remains were Laci Peterson and her unborn son, Connor. For months after Laci went missing, the case took a final, devastating turn. 5 days later, on April 18, 2003, Scott Peterson was arrested in La Jolla, California. He was near a golf course, staying with his family. Police found him with $15,000 in cash, his brother's ID, camping equipment, and a car packed with survival gear. He had dyed his hair blonde and grown a beard. To investigators, it looked like he was preparing to flee, possibly to Mexico. Scott didn't resist arrest. He was taken into custody and charged with 2 counts of murder, one for Laci and one for their unborn son. What had begun as a missing persons case on Christmas Eve had turned into a national story of betrayal, deception, and murder. As Scott sat behind bars, the country watched, waiting for justice. Following Scott Peterson's arrest in April 2003, the investigation shifted from search and recovery to a complex criminal case. The arrest shocked the public, but for Laci Peterson's family, it was a grim confirmation of what they had begun to suspect, that the man they had trusted, the husband of their beloved daughter, was likely responsible for her death and the death of their unborn grandson, Connor. Scott was charged with 2 counts of murder, first-degree murder for Laci and second-degree murder for Connor. Prosecutors argued that the case deserved the death penalty, and the legal battle ahead promised to be long and emotionally draining. Scott's arrest came just days after Laci and Connor's bodies were found washed ashore, a coincidence that only heightened suspicion. Prosecutors believed the discovery forced Scott's hand. His appearance, the survival gear, the cash, and the fake ID all pointed toward a man ready to disappear. The location of the bodies was critical. They were found less than 2 miles from the exact place Scott had told police he went fishing. Investigators had scoured the bay in the early days, but decomposition and water conditions had made recovery difficult. When the bodies finally surfaced, it reinforced the theory that Scott had transported Laci's body by boat and dumped her in that location. Her torso had been badly damaged, and Connor's body, which appeared to have been expelled post-mortem, was more intact. It was a horrifying detail that would haunt jurors and the public alike. Scott pleaded not guilty. In the months following his arrest, public interest in the case exploded. News vans parked outside the courthouse. Tabloids ran daily stories. Cable news debated every move made by the police, the attorneys, and Scott's defense team. The case had everything that captured national attention: a beautiful, pregnant woman gone missing, a charming but suspicious husband, and a mistress who had unknowingly walked into the middle of a nightmare. Amber Frey became a central figure in the prosecution's strategy. She held nothing back. In media interviews and in cooperation with investigators, she laid out how Scott had lied to her from the beginning. When they met in November 2002, Scott claimed to be single. Just weeks later, as his wife and unborn child were missing, he continued his romantic relationship with her. He even told Amber in early December that he was preparing for his first Christmas without his wife. Amber had recorded over a dozen phone calls with Scott after Laci went missing, all while police monitored the case. In these calls, Scott spun elaborate lies, claiming to be traveling in Europe, grieving his late wife, and wanting to build a future with Amber. He even called her on New Year's Eve while attending a vigil for Laci, pretending to be in Paris. The deception was staggering. To many, this behavior erased any doubt of his guilt. Behind the scenes, Laci's family struggled with their grief and the betrayal. Her mother, Sharon Rocha, had once supported Scott. But as details unfolded, the affair, the lies, the evidence, her heartbreak turned to anger. She became an outspoken voice for justice, speaking at press conferences and later testifying in court. Her pain was visible and deeply personal. In contrast, Scott's parents, Lee and Jackie Peterson, stood by their son. They insisted he was innocent and claimed the media had created a biased narrative. They criticized the investigation, suggesting it had been rushed and unfair. Scott's defense attorneys argued there was no physical evidence tying him to the murder. No blood. No weapon. No eyewitnesses. All they had, they said, was circumstantial evidence and public opinion. But the prosecution believed otherwise. They built their case piece by piece. First was Scott's behavior. From his emotionless interviews to his lies to Amber, he appeared distant, calculating, and detached. Detectives Brocchini and Bueller later said that Scott showed no urgency in finding Laci, even in the early hours of her disappearance. He didn't help organize searches. He didn't ask for updates. His lack of concern stood in sharp contrast to Laci's family, who refused to give up hope until the bodies were found. Second was the timing. Laci's last known communication was on the evening of December 23rd, when she visited her sister's salon. After that, there were no confirmed sightings. Scott told police she was alive the next morning, preparing to walk the dog, but no one else could verify that. Investigators theorized that Laci had likely been killed sometime during the night of December 23rd or early December 24th, before Scott left for his fishing trip. Then there was the route and the location. Scott had no clear reason to drive to the Berkeley Marina that morning. He didn't fish there regularly, and his fishing license had been purchased only days earlier. He didn't tell anyone he was going there in advance. He brought with him a brand new boat, bought just weeks before, that very few people knew he owned. Investigators believed this was not a casual fishing trip. It was a premeditated effort to dispose of Laci's body in deep water, where he thought it would never be found. The concrete anchors also raised suspicion. Police found evidence that Scott had made homemade anchors using concrete, yet only one was discovered in his boat. They believed he had used others to weigh down Laci's body. Over time, her remains likely broke free and surfaced in April. By the time the trial approached, the case had become a media circus. The court decided to move the trial from Modesto to Redwood City, hoping to find an impartial jury. The trial began in June 2004 and was expected to last several months. Scott's defense team, led by attorney Mark Garagos, argued that the media and police had unfairly targeted Scott. They claimed that other potential suspects had not been investigated and that the evidence against Scott was thin and speculative. The prosecution, led by Rick DeStaso, focused on the timeline Scott's affair and the physical location where the bodies were found. They acknowledged that there was no direct forensic evidence, but said the totality of circumstances pointed to guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. Laci's family was present every day, wearing pink ribbons and holding back tears. They listened to every word, hoping that justice would finally come. As witness after witness testified, including Amber Frey, detectives, and forensic experts, the story built steadily. The courtroom was packed. Reporters filed daily updates. The nation, once again, followed every development. And Scott sat in the defendant's chair, calm and composed, rarely showing emotion. The trial was far from over, and the verdict was yet to come. But the evidence was mounting, and the story of what happened to Laci Peterson, a story that began with hope and ended in tragedy, was finally being told in full. As the summer of 2004 unfolded, the murder trial of Scott Peterson moved into its final stages. The courtroom in Redwood City remained packed, the nation still gripped by every detail. For months, jurors listened to a steady stream of evidence, some circumstantial, some emotional, but all forming a chilling narrative. Amber Frey's testimony was among the most powerful. Calm and composed, she walked the court through her relationship with Scott in detail. She explained how they met, how he lied to her from the start, and how he manipulated her even after Laci went missing. The prosecution played recordings of their phone calls. Jurors heard Scott faking calls from Paris, speaking about grief, love, and a future with Amber, all while pretending to mourn a wife he knew would never return. Amber didn't hold back. Her honesty and the way she worked with the police gave her credibility that Scott lacked. Other key witnesses included detectives, forensic specialists, and Laci's family members. Sharon Rocha, Laci's mother, spoke about her daughter's last days, the excitement of the pregnancy, and the pain of realizing that Scott was lying. Her words were quiet but cutting. In court, she represented every parent who had ever trusted someone, only to be betrayed in the worst possible way. Throughout the trial, the defense, led by attorney Mark Garagos, tried to sow doubt. They argued that there was no physical evidence tying Scott to the crime. No fingerprints. No DNA. No blood. They claimed the media had turned the public against Scott before the trial ever began. Garagos suggested that Laci had been abducted after Scott left for the marina, and that the true killer dumped her body in the same area by coincidence. He also pointed to break-ins in the neighborhood around the time Laci disappeared, suggesting a possible alternate suspect. But the prosecution stayed focused. They reminded jurors that no one had seen Laci alive after the evening of December 23rd, that Scott had bought a boat in secret, that he had conducted online searches for water currents in San Francisco Bay, that he lied to police and to Amber, that the bodies of Laci and Connor washed up in the very place Scott claimed to have gone fishing, despite no one else knowing that detail. The motive was clear enough. Scott didn't want the responsibility of fatherhood. He wanted a new life, and he was willing to throw away his old one to have it. As closing arguments were delivered in early November 2004, the courtroom fell silent. Prosecutor Rick DeStaso walked the jury through the timeline again, pointing to the lies, the affair, and the calculated behavior. He said it wasn't one detail that proved guilt, it was all of them, together. The defense countered, saying that circumstantial evidence could be misleading, and that Scott's poor judgment didn't make him a killer. The jury deliberated for over a week. On November 12, 2004, the verdict was read. The room was packed, reporters, family members, onlookers. Some stood in the hallway, holding their breath. Scott Peterson was found guilty of first-degree murder for the death of Laci Peterson and second-degree murder for the death of their unborn son, Connor. There was no celebration in the courtroom, just quiet sobs, tears, and the weight of a verdict that confirmed the worst. Outside, the crowd erupted. Cheers broke out as the news spread. For many, it was justice. For Laci's family, it was a small measure of peace after nearly 2 years of pain. But the trial wasn't over. A separate phase would determine Scott's punishment. The same jury was now tasked with deciding whether he should spend life in prison or receive the death penalty. Sharon Rocha returned to the stand. this time to deliver a victim impact statement. Her voice shook as she described the agony of losing her daughter and grandson. She told the jury about the joy Laci brought to everyone, about the baby shower gifts that were never opened, and about the empty room in her heart that could never be filled. Her words brought the courtroom to tears. On December 13, 2004, exactly 1 year after Laci's funeral, the jury announced their decision. Scott Peterson was sentenced to death by lethal injection. He was transferred to California's San Quentin State Prison, where he would await execution. Even then, the story didn't end. Scott's legal team filed appeals, arguing that media attention had made a fair trial impossible and that jurors had been improperly influenced. In 2020, the California Supreme Court overturned Scott's death sentence, not the conviction, but the sentence, citing errors in jury selection. In 2021, he was resentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He remains behind bars to this day. The case left a permanent mark on the justice system and on American culture. It changed how missing persons cases were handled, especially those involving pregnant women. The intense media coverage drew comparisons to trials like that of O.J. Simpson and Casey Anthony. The public followed every move, dissected every interview, and formed opinions long before the verdict was read. Laci Peterson's name became known across the country, not just as a victim, but as a symbol of trust betrayed. Her story brought attention to domestic violence, emotional manipulation, and the unseen cracks in seemingly perfect relationships. Friends and neighbors had once described the Petersons as the ideal couple. No one imagined what was happening behind closed doors. Amber Fry wrote a book. So did Sharon Rocha. Both women used their voices to tell the truth as they saw it and to bring awareness to women's safety. Sharon became an advocate for victims' rights, speaking out in public and working with lawmakers. Her strength, even in grief, inspired many. In the years since, the Peterson case has been the subject of documentaries, podcasts, and investigative specials. But through all the retellings, one truth remains clear. Laci Peterson was a daughter, a sister, a friend, and a soon-to-be mother. She was taken in the most tragic way possible, and her family, especially her mother, never stopped fighting for her. The story of Laci and Connor is not just about loss. It's about the pursuit of justice, the impact of lies, and the resilience of those left behind. It's about a community that refused to look away and a family that turned heartbreak into courage. As the sun set over Modesto on Christmas Eve in 2002, no one could have predicted what was about to unfold. But nearly 2 decades later, the world still remembers the young woman with the bright smile, the unborn child who never had a chance, and the trial that revealed the darkness hiding behind a picture-perfect life.